even as we start. We'll shortly be projecting the slides for today's session. Thanks. As you continue writing your names and the national starting positions in the chat, I will take us through the agenda. And before I do that, as I've said, my name is Milanoi. I'm the PGI coordinator for Africa region, and I sit at the IFRC regional office in Nairobi. I will kindly request my colleagues Maureen and Sahara, who will be facilitating with me today, to introduce myself. Then I will start.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maureen Derito. I'm the Senior PGI Officer seated in Nairobi and supporting African National Societies. I'm glad that you could all make to join today's session, and we hope that it's going to be an interactive session and that you also get to ask all the questions that you've been having in regards to CVA and PGI.
Great. Thank you, Maureen. Sahara, are you able to introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Sahara. I am the CVA coordinator with Africa. Let me put the new CVA coordinator because I'm still new, I think. If you've interacted before with Maya, so I've taken up that position that Maya was holding. So I'm glad and happy to get to know you today and to interact in this session. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Sahara. To start today, we will be going through a Mentimeter exercise. I hope you've been able to access the PGI sensitive CVA checklist. If not, Maureen will put a link on the chat. Have you been able to access the checklist, or do we figure out a way to put it on the link for you?
You can check your emails. You'll be able to, it was part of the documents attached while sending out the email.
I hope you've been able to access it, since we will be using it for the next Mentimeter exercise. Okay. So for the next Mentimeter exercise, a thumbs up if you have your PGI CVA checklist with you, if that's okay. And that we can move on to the Mentimeter exercise. Perfect. Thanks. So as we do that as well, I'll just go through the agenda. So we will have a Mentimeter exercise where we'll be just having a few questions, and the questions will be based on the checklist. So we encourage you, as we project the questions on screen, have your gadgets ready, whether it's your laptop or a phone. We will share the Mentimeter code and details. Log into Mentimeter. We will be able to project a few questions, and please take a few minutes to look at it. Look, if you need to refer to your checklist, feel free to refer to your checklist and just try and answer the questions so we can have a conversation on that. After that, we will have a short briefing on what is PGI, why is it important in our work. After that, we will be taken through a brief on CVA and its importance, and how to ensure that we have a PGI sensitive CVA, and Sahara will take us through that session. After that as well, we will just specifically focus on the hunger crisis and see what is the current situation in the hunger crisis, what are we doing well, what needs to be improved, and how do we collaborate as PGI and CVA and Ops Lead and all the other actors as well. How best we collaborate to ensure that our hunger crisis response is sensitive to PGI. And we know that mostly for the hunger crisis response, it's focusing on cash and water assistance. So that's why we want to really work with the CVI team as well to ensure that it is sensitive to PGI as well. And as we are all aware that this focuses on quality assurance and accountability, it makes our response stronger, better, and of quality as well. So then we will just have a Q&A session, and hoping we will do our best to stick on time. So now I will welcome Maureen, so we directly go to the Mentimeter exercise as well. Welcome, Maureen.
Thank you, Milanoy. So I kindly request that we all get into Mentimeter. I'm sure you all by now know how to get there, but you can utilize the following. We have the code, we have the QR code, we have the code, which is 7864592. And we also have a link there. So whichever you want to use, please feel free to utilize the same. The code is 7864592. You can pick it from the chat. It's been shared to you. Once you're able to get into Ment, just let me know, so that at least now I can get you started. I hope you all can access the code from the chat, as I want to change my screens now to be able to present the results. Great. So if you're all there, great. I can see you all. Great. So we're about to start. I'm just thinking about 5 people. I encourage us to please join so that we can at least be a good number. Don't be afraid. The questions are very simple, straightforward. Use the code 7864592. I'm seeing about 6 people who've joined. If we could get more people, 7. It's a good number. Let's at least get to 10, since we are about 16, 20 participants. So at least if we can get to 10, that would be good. Thanks, Hopewell, for sharing the link again. For those who may not be able to access, who've not managed it to access. Great, awesome. And I love the icons that you've all selected. I love your beautiful icons. Awesome. So I think we have some sort of quorum to start. And so we'll start. What are the PGI requirements to ensure PGI mainstreaming and risk mitigation? So just feel free to fill in your responses. There's a timer set. So let's just try to be able to respond, even if it's one answer. We have about 50 seconds to go. Thank you for also utilizing the chat box for those who may have a challenge in accessing Menti. Thirty seconds to go. If you still haven't managed to access Menti, you can also utilize the chat box to be able to provide your responses. Ten seconds to go. Time's up. Great, so we have PGI minimum standards. We have PGI analysis risks, protections, PGI minimum standards, buy-in from the leaders, PGI analysis, that's correct. For the others who have not managed to participate, I think it would be good to just utilize the chat box. It's important to ensure engagement between CVA, PGI, and CEA. Very important to ensure data protection. So, and all this you can find within the checklist. That's why we always encourage that people get to utilize the checklist because all these responses are there, and we'll be going through this even as we continue. So allow me to get to the next question. Name 2 minimum measures and 2 advanced measures to have in place in ensuring PGI sensitive CVA. What do you think are the 2 minimum measures and 2 advanced measures that you have to put in place to ensure PGI sensitive CVA? If you have the response, just put it up on the, just type it in, and it's going to be able to display. Also utilize the chat box if you're having a challenge accessing Menti. Encourage participation from all. Thank you. Let's keep it putting in our answers. Remember, today's a learning session, so you may not know the answer, but you're going to get to know it before the day ends, the session ends. Nanoi has also shared the document on the Teams chat for anyone who may not have managed to access it. Thank you for all the responses coming in. Encourage participation from all of us. We are about 20 of us. So please just come in with your responses. So people are saying mapping PGI stakeholders, commitment of the national society, very important, ensuring PGI training sessions, gender assessments and gender analysis. We need to also ensure that we have the PGI policies in place to be able to support our work. We also need to get commitment from the national society. Of course, we need to have the PGI experts, CVA experts, CEA experts on board to just enable us to be able to utilize and support a PGI sensitive CVA approach. Community participation, safe access to all. Risk mapping is very important. Staff also need to be trained, so capacity building of staff is important, and we need to ensure that this is done. Thank you so much for your participation on this. Feel free to also just keep noting down these questions and responses within yourself, because we're going to also discuss the same even as we continue. Because of time, we'll move to the next question. The following are some of the typical PGI risks in CVA. Which one is not? Which one do you think is not a typical PGI risk? So from the options, we have lack of access to information and not upholding community's dignity, lack of participation by different community groups. We have safety of women and girls when accessing CVA. And lastly, we have increased price of goods and services inflation. Feel free to submit your responses. Which one do you think is not a typical PGI risk in CVA? Encourage participation from all. Thank you. Please let's keep our responses coming in. Thank you. Thank you. Let's keep our responses coming in. We can get some responses for about 10 of us, 10 more of us would be good. We have 6 of you who've responded so far. It'll be good to get some more responses. Please respond for those who are yet to do so. Thank you. So I think a majority are correct. It's the answer is D. All the other 3 are very typical PGI risks in CVA. We talk about issues of access, we talk about issues of participation, we talk about the dignity of the communities that we are seeking to serve. We also talk about the safety of the women and girls, but generally the safety of the communities that we're serving. So the answer is D. And the last but not least, sorry for that. If you have any questions on the PGI sensitive CVA checklist, just feel free to jot down any question that comes to mind right now. We'll go through that and see whether we are able to respond within the presentations that we have. And if not, this can be something we can discuss at the end. But feel free to just jot all the questions you have in mind at this particular point. Remember, there's no wrong question. Whatever concerns you may have or questions you may have, it would be good to just share with us. Just jot in your questions, and then we can be able to proceed. I know some of you, this is the first time you're hearing about the PGI sensitive CVA checklist. For some of you, you're aware of it, and maybe you've been utilizing the checklist itself. For some, you have known of it, but you do not know how it operates or works. So this is a good time for you to just ask any questions that you may be having. It can also be in a form of expectation of what you expect to get from the session. So also feel free to have this. We have 2 minutes for this, so that we can move to the next part of our presentation. There's a question that has come in. It will be great to hear on how it has been used by national societies. There's someone who wants to see whether there's a national site that has been able to utilize the checklist. What are some of the challenges and successes? But also how best to utilize the checklist within, of course, the hunger crisis response, but any other response that the National Society may have. Any other questions? I will leave this open for any questions that may come in, and I'm sure we'll be able to address them even as we continue with the presentation. So in the meantime, we'll go back to our presentation, but thank you so much for participating in the process. So just take us back to the presentation. So just before we continue, I know some of you have heard of the different acronyms that we've been using or we might use as we continue. Just a reminder that PGI stands for Protection, Gender and Inclusion. CVA stands for Cash and Voucher Assistance. CEA stands for Community Engagement and Accountability. SGB stands for Sexual and Gender-Based Violence. And PSEA stands for Prevention of Sexual Exploitation and Abuse. So as we continue, we may be using these acronyms. So it's important that you at least get to know what they mean. But I think this is something you've already been working with within the movement, so you are aware of the acronyms themselves. So I want to invite Milanoy to start us up as we continue. Welcome, Milanoy.
Thanks, Maureen. I hope the first session at least has been able to help us look at the checklist, open it up, try and interact and see what's in there. And as we continue this session, I encourage all of us to at least continue looking at the checklist. If you have any questions as they come along, put it on the slide for Maureen. Put it on the slide that Maureen was sharing as well. Continue using the Mentimeter or on the chat box. We will be monitoring it as we go on. In case there are any challenges with the internet, I will switch off my camera, but happy to put my camera on just to interact with colleagues as well. So I will just take you through the slide on a basic understanding on what is protection, gender and inclusion. Why do we do PGI as the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement? And why is it important in this conversation today? So PGI is IFRC's approach to address violence, discrimination, and exclusion. And when we talk about protection, gender, and inclusion, it is a broad umbrella for all the different aspects that fall under PGI, because a lot of things fall under PGI, including disability inclusion, child protection, prevention and response to sexual and gender-based violence. So a lot of work on standalone PGI activities, but at the same time, mainstream PGI in operations and programs. So we talk about protection, we look at addressing different forms of violence. In our work every day, we know that in any emergency operation, there are heightened levels of violence against communities, families, children, women, persons with disabilities. So protection looks at addressing violence. And this is not only a response mechanism, but also how do we mitigate and prevent violence as well. So we look at keeping people safe from harm. And why we have PGI as an approach in FRC that cuts across everything is that we look at prevention and mitigation way before we get to response. And that's why it's important when you're doing PGI, we include PGI from the start of operation or any long-term programs as well. Because when we do, we'll be able to do, for example, a PGI analysis. We'll understand what are the protection needs, what is the current context? What are the gender and diversity? How is the community in terms of gender and diversity? Where we are looking at understanding what are the different needs, risks, and concerns for the community. And this is where we talk about the analysis in any assessments and before we start any projects as well. Do we analyze the different contexts? And by doing this, we speak to the different people in the community. As we do our assessments, do we analyze and understand in this community, who are the different groups represented? What is the best way to engage as well? It does take some time. I know people think that we've always said that maybe PGI can take longer and this is an emergency operation. But what we always say as well, how do we ensure quality assurance? How are we accountable? How do we understand who's most in need if we don't do PGI well? And that means we're responding without an understanding, one, what are the needs, risks, and concerns for the community by hearing from the community themselves. And this is where we are very specific when we talk about, for example, data, we'll always ask how many people were reached in the assessment, for example, how many women, men, youth, persons with disability, how did you speak to the community? How did you end up analyzing and understanding that it's only 2,000 people that you can reach, or 2,000 households from this particular community? How did you come up to that approach? So PGI is one of the lenses that helps us to understand who is most in need, who is most vulnerable, what are the needs and concerns of the community, to even guide in terms of what is the most immediate needs, because we cannot assume that we know what the community requires. For example, is it cash and water assistance? Is it food in itself? And what are the different mechanisms to go about it, with an understanding that communities also have the power. They're not only beneficiaries, but they also know and have ideas in terms of the best approach as well. So in terms of inclusion, we look at ensuring that no one is left out in our emergency operations and in our long-term programs as well. So many times we will assume that, or say, maybe we do understand, even though we come from a specific community, no one has been left out and is most in need. So just factoring in that we have a responsibility to ensure that how is the community constituted, how are we in terms of gender and other diversity factors, are persons with disability actually included in our response? If not, why are we involving and engaging them? And just factoring in who could have been excluded, having a second thought. And this can be done in different ways. We can look at what are the already assessments that have been done previously. We can do a baseline. We can do we can even just do an online quick research online and see the country context and things like that. But with the power of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, we understand that we are on ground. So we do have this information. It's just having an analysis in everything that we do to ensure that it informs our work. Yeah. So it's very important, and that's why we say that protection, gender, and inclusion is one of the ways we use as an approach we use in the Red Cross in everything that we do to ensure quality assurance and accountability. When we address different levels of violence, discrimination, and exclusion, it means we are accountable to the communities in terms of who has been reached, how we came up to the conclusion that this is the community most in need, and actually using resources well, ensuring that the resources that are given to us are used in the right way. We're able to account to donors as well, that the most people in need in this community are these different groups. And we can be able to show the PGI analysis. As an analysis we have done to come up with this understanding, we can say we've been able to engage different communities, different members of the community, and show how we have done that. So PGI is really one of those approaches, because we know, and when we understand what are the different needs and risks, we cannot say that we already know. It's always good to have an analysis and to understand, to be able to share on conclusion as well. And every time we do this, I think it helps us to be more accountable to the communities, to be able to ensure that our programs are quality. We're just not responding, but we ensure that it's a quality response, since we've met the most in need and in the right way, and actually the needs that they require as well. So PGI as an approach is what is used to strengthen our work, and to ensure that we are addressing protection needs, gender diversity needs, any exclusion that's coming up as well, and doing it in an integrated way in everything that we do from the start of the project to the end of the project. Not when we see GBV cases as well, that's when we start bringing in PGI, but we should also factor in from the start as well. We can do a lot of prevention and mitigation before we come to response as well. So there's a lot that can be done to avoid any upcoming cases or any challenges in the middle of the project as well. So it's really to ensure a successful project that we can talk about as well. Just to highlight briefly in terms of where PGI falls and why this is important to this conversation. We know we have Strategy 2030 that we are all working towards as well. And PGI falls under Strategic Priority 5, Values, Power, and Inclusion. But at the same time, it's mainstream through all the other strategic priorities as well. Like we've mentioned, PGI is an approach that's applied in everything that we do to look at addressing and mitigating, preventing, and responding to all forms of violence, discrimination, and exclusion as well. So it cuts across as well, including in the enabling factors. When we talk about national society development, when we talk about trust and accountable Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, PGI is one of those approaches as well, to ensure that we have trusted and accountable national societies and the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement as well as a whole. So it's very important, even as we look at our strategic priorities, to understand that PGI is one of the main strategic priorities that we're working towards. And we have specific goals and outcomes that we're working towards. And by 2030, we should be able to be accountable and say, this is how we've strengthened our work, and ensure that we are more accountable, and we are working towards preventing, mitigating all forms of violence, discrimination, and exclusion in our work as well. So this looks at us internally and externally as well. So in terms of emergency operations, for example, the hunger crisis, how we do PGI is that we talk about mainstreaming PGI in everything that we do. So mainstreaming means, for example, if it's in cash and voucher assistance like today, we understand what are the minimum standards in cash and voucher assistance. I'm sure we've all seen the PGI minimum standards in emergencies. It's understanding what that aspect is. What we have done as a team as well in Africa region is that we've sat down with PGI and CVA focal points, including some of you here as well, developed a simple checklist to enable us better work together and see what do we need to put in place. So this checklist we're discussing today is one of the ways you can use to ensure that we mainstream PGI in CVA, and what are the benefits of that. Other ways we do it as well is that we do deploy experts to come and support in specific emergency operations and provide the technical support required. And beyond that as well, we do have, beyond mainstreaming, we also have specialized activities. One of the things you'll see we do a lot is on prevention and response to sexual exploitation and abuse. That is a specialized activity where we look towards ensuring that internally we are safe, and externally, as we work with communities, we have a responsibility to keep communities safe as well, and to keep our children, in terms of child safeguarding, keep our children safe in our project, that our work doesn't cause more harm than good. Because then we lose trust from the communities, we're not accountable, there's loss of funding, there's lack of trust. So all these elements are meant to strengthen our responses. We also talk about that PGI is everyone's business. And even though we don't all have the competencies or knowledges to do it, we have a responsibility to be able, one, for example, to reach out to the PGI focal point in your national society. If you don't know who your PGI focal point is, reach out to the cluster delegation. They will link you up to us or reach to us directly. Speak to us, and we will be able to provide the technical support and advice required as well. So that's why we say PGI is everyone's business. Even though we do not have the competencies or knowledge, we need to know how to do it as well. So this is just a short brief in terms of what PGI is. And I spoke really about the minimum standards. I spoke about the minimum standards and how best to do it. And we talk about the minimum standards looks at dignity, access, ensuring communities dignity, access, participation, and safety in everything that we do. So I encourage us to look at the PGI minimum standards on how well to do it. It has a section on how to integrate PGI in cash as well. What are the minimum standards as well? As PGI, we have a lot of documents to guide our work. This is just a few of them. I will, because of time, I will not go through it a lot. I will just welcome Sahara. Before I do, maybe just to highlight a little bit in terms of several resources, that are relevant to mention. For example, the Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Joint Action on Prevention and Response Resolution. This resolution on sexual and gender-based violence prevention and response provides what is the role of the national society, what is the role of FRC, and what is the role of ICRC in prevention and response to SGBV in emergencies. So we have all signed this resolution and committed that we will work in prevention and response to GBV. So we will be held to account, even as we look towards how far have we come as well. So we have the PSCA policy, we have the operational framework, all these things guide our work as well. And as we share the slides, you will see some of the resources that we have beyond the checklist that you can use as well in our work as well. I encourage you to look at these resources. Honestly, we always say that the PGI team has most resources. Do we have resources? Yes, we do. We just need to be able to engage with them as well, use them more, and they will actually strengthen our programs and operations. I hand it over to Sahara to really take us through cash and voucher assistance and how to ensure PGI sensitive CVA as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Melanoy and Maureen, for that really engaging discussion. I will pick up from here and I will explain what cash and voucher assistance is. I know you know that very well. And for those who may not, have done any training in cash, I will not be able to go in depth. But if you need anything on or to understand more on cash and voucher assistance, you can always reach out to me. And there are also courses that are available online, all types of courses from what cash and voucher assistance is to what, how to design, how to implement, to even how to contract an FSP. There's an online training by IFRC. So I won't be able to go in details, but we can share the links for all those trainings. So here I'm just going to really give a definition of what CVA is. CVA refers to all programs where cash or vouchers for goods or services are directly provided to the recipients. And in the context of humanitarian assistance, the term is used to refer to provision of cash transfers or vouchers given to individuals, households, or community recipients, not to government or state actors. So basically, a CVA is really for emergency, it's really for humanitarian context. We know that we use cash during recovery, we use cash in the resilience, as part of maybe longer term programming, either social protection or shock responsive safety nets. But here, the definition that I'm giving you is specifically for emergencies. Next slide, please. So here, today's discussion is about CVA and PGI. And because we have moved from, in-kind distribution to cash, because one of the important things for CVA is that we normally say, sorry, go back one slide. We normally say that cash provides dignity. So we assume that since, cash gives dignity to the household, gives dignity to the woman who is receiving, gives dignity to the man, to the elderly, to the disabled, that we assume that there may be no risks, but there are actually risks. And so I can explain that into maybe the next slide. Sorry, Maureen, you can actually go to the next slide. So here in this slide, we're talking about GBV, gender, inclusion, and protection. What does it mean? So does it mean that when we have reached many women, let's say our program reached 70% women, 30% men, or our program was able to cover 10% in terms of disabled or old, or let's say elderly, or pregnant women, does it mean that we've really prevented any GBV? So that's not the case. So basically, metrics or numbers doesn't mean that we've achieved PGI sensitive CVA. It actually means that when we have that reaching of 70% women, in terms of, let's say you're targeting 1,000 households, you're giving cash, and out of the 1,000 you've reached maybe, let's say 700 women, and we say that yes, because we've reached 700 women, we're PGI sensitive CVA. It doesn't work that way. What we are looking at and what the level we want to reach is that yes, we've reached women, yes, we've reached disabled, yes, we've reached the youth, the young, the pregnant women, all different groups of the community, and we've targeted them, but we have ensured that we involve them in the participation, meaningful participation, not just participation, and we've empowered them. Not that we've reached 70% women, but the women had issues with the cash, or we created other risks, or we exacerbated intimate violence within the household, things like that. So this is just a graphic explanation, or a slide to just explain to you. So what are we looking at? We're actually looking at minimizing risks during the project design, and we're also looking at mainstreaming mitigation of protection risks. So in minimizing risks during protection design, how are we expected to do with the lens of the PGI? So for example, that when we're designing projects, we have to agree on the modality we want to use. Let's say we're using unconditional cash, or we want to use a cash for work, or multi-purpose cash, or we want to do vouchers, or food for work. Whatever modality we are using, are we looking at how that modality will do no harm, or we don't cause harm, or we prevent any harm that the modality we are using will cause? Delivery mechanism, how are we delivering this cash? Are we doing cash in hand? Where they're coming to in the market, are we, is it very far that we may cause more harm to this woman? Or how is she receiving this money? Is she receiving openly that she can be followed up later? So basically looking at all the risks that is protection, gender, and inclusion risks within when we're doing or agreeing on the modality. The second part is what transfer value do we use, or what transfer number of installments do we use? So for example, a woman maybe is let's say it's a survivor, she's a GBV survivor, she doesn't want to go out, or she doesn't want to be seen when she's receiving the money. So maybe if you give her 6 months, every month she has to go and receive the money, then it may cause her other, she may be uncomfortable, or it may expose her and she doesn't want to be exposed. So so how do we ensure that we ask what she needs? Like maybe she will say, let me receive the money 3 times. And we know that sometimes, and we give her, instead of giving her $50 times 3 times, we might give her the 150 at a go, and we see how we can monitor whatever objectives we have. So thinking about the installments, thinking about the amount transfer value we're giving with the lens of protection, mainstreaming, and minimizing risks. The third one, for example, we know that we have to have distribution sites, or let's say where we have digital cash and we are not distributing hard cash or currency. Then we are doing registration. So where we are doing the registrations openly, are there survivors we're registering? Are there people who, when we are registering, might cause them harm in the community? So we need to think of these excluded people, or is there even exclusion, people who are supposed to receive this assistance, but they are not receiving, so inclusion, exclusion errors happen and a lot within cash. So how do we make sure that we're looking this from the lens of GBV mainstreaming and minimizing risks and maximizing benefits? So next slide. So the next, I said, we spoke about minimizing risks. Now we go to mainstreaming risk mitigation. We want to mainstream risk mitigation, and our main principle is to do no harm. I mean, that is, if we are giving cash and we cause harm, then we are not actually helping the community. So anytime we're doing cash, we need to be thinking about that. So the first thing is, why are we doing this? We need to make sure that, gender considerations within CVA may have in mind that it may increase risk of GBV or other protection risks. So how are we going to ensure that we are not doing that? Then the next question will be, maybe go to, just show the whole slide. Why or what are we looking at? So what exactly are we looking at? So we are looking at avoiding increasing protection risks, and we are looking at reducing the risk of exposure for some groups. So the groups I've spoken about: survivors, the old, the elderly, the disabled, the blind, the pregnant woman, the breastfeeding woman. So we don't want to expose them. They may have, some unique elements within them that, might cause them risks if we expose them. Then how do we do it? It's ensuring that we have awareness of the protection inclusion, mainstreaming, which is compulsory for all our programs, not only CVA. And we need to understand the context, the social economic context, because sometimes as humanitarians, we can go to a context and we tell them, you know what, we want the women to be to be the community leader. So we need to understand the context, and not as much as we want to have equal participation, we also don't impose social norms that the community doesn't believe in. So understanding the context and encouraging meaningful participation in a way that we are not, telling the community that we should not believe in this and we should believe in this. Then when do we do it? I think mainstreaming, we all know it has to happen across the project's life cycle, from preparedness to design to implementation to even monitoring when we're doing our PDMs. Next slide, please. So I've spoken about a lot of mitigation, and mainstreaming is really, really very necessary within CVA, because sometimes we say that cash is not riskier than in-kind. You know, some people say, oh, cash is risky because it's money, cash is, but as cash experts, cash, people who, are encouraging the cash modality, we know that CVA has its own risks. So we need to ensure that projects are proactively. We don't want to be reactive. We don't want to be, go out and solve problems when they've already happened. We want to ensure that we're proactively working on, ensuring that we do not cause or increase the risk of GBV. And most importantly, we do not introduce new risks. Remember, I mentioned social norms that exist. By trying to subvert that social norm, we really, really need to ensure that we are not creating new risks. And number two, we need to seek and identify and take action to mitigate protection risk in the context. For example, if we cannot change that context, what other things can we do to ensure that there is meaningful participation by all groups? So for example, what other cash plus things can we do? Do we organize sessions to talk to men, for example? And do we organize sessions where we're talking about importance of pregnant women having better nutrition? Hence, we are targeting or only giving cash to pregnant women for that reason. So, having those cash plus things to ensure that we are mitigating protection risk in context where we also don't want to interfere with the social norms. Then definitely we need to facilitate and monitor vulnerable groups for safe access to services. We need to ensure that these groups are able to safely access the services that we're giving. Then next slide, please. So we've spoken about minimizing risk. We've spoken about mainstreaming GBV within CVA. Mitigating GBV and mainstreaming protection within a CVA project. Now, how do we maximize benefits? So we've minimized, we've mainstreamed, but we also know that we can maximize benefits of CVA in ensuring that we are mitigating risks of protection. We are also responding with cash for protection outcomes. Plus, we are also mainstreaming. So in all aspects of protection levels of response, mitigation, and prevention. So here, for example, we assume that once we have done cash, we've mitigated risks, and we've not exposed the women because we've given her, for example, she received her money in mobile. We've not caused any harm. So, for example, you've given the cash and voucher assistance. It's supposed to meet basic needs, and the outcome probably is to reduce the negative coping mechanisms that the community has gone into. For example, maybe women had to get money in ways that are not dignified for them because they could not be able to feed for their children. But now we've given them cash and they've stopped doing that. So we've reduced the negative coping strategies. And so hence we decrease risks of that woman. It doesn't work like that. We need to continuously work on, that we've given the cash. We need to ensure that we are reducing risks in the community of protection risks, of exclusion risks, and of SGBV risks. Then maybe we've increased the food security and maybe we've reduced the negative coping mechanism. Then we assume the pink side is the assumption that we make. We assume that we've decreased domestic violence within the household. So it doesn't work that way. So sometimes we have negative coping strategies, but there's still domestic violence within the household. So we need to continuously support the community. And the same way, because we've targeted women, we've targeted the elderly, we think that we've given the decision making to the women, or the control over cash because we've given the cash to the women. We need to do extra to ensure that there's really decision making is in the hands of the women by maybe engaging with the men, having sessions with them, making them understand why we are targeting women, and as well as ensuring that there's safe access to markets and services, for example, for the disabled and the elderly. The next slide, please. And so here it's just this slide where we're just going to explain to you that, for SGBV safe referral pathways, as cash actors, if you are not a case manager, if you don't have, the capacity or the knowledge, or you're not the GBV person, please, and something comes up when you're either doing assessments or you're doing a community mobilization, and someone walks to you and tells you an incident of SGBV, how do you handle? First of all, you cannot dismiss and tell them, I'm not the person, I'm not able to help you. That is the wrong. You need to look, you need to listen, and you need to ask, how can you help? And you need to be a bit respectful, and you need to ensure that, of course, there's confidentiality, because when we're dealing with the community, so many things can happen. Specifically, when we're giving cash, the woman can come up and say, okay, I've gotten this cash, but I am a survivor, and somebody might come up to me, and so how do you handle that? So is the SGBV actor or a referral pathway available? So you need to know whether we have a referral pathway within the community. As a national society, we need to be working with, and ensuring that when we are going for assessments, that whoever we are sending for assessment understands that there's specific referral pathway, that in case something happens, that you can refer them to. Then if it is yes, then you follow the pathway, you refer the survivor of the on the GBV services available, you inform them of consent that you can actually refer them to the survivor. If not, then you can link and communicate as much as you know about other available services, the hospitals, or you see how else you can tell the person that I'm not able to record, and see, don't take any personal information. Next slide, please. So for you, to help you with this, there are helpful mobile apps that can work when you're in the field. Whatever I told you, you don't need any notes. If you have your mobile, if you have an Android, you can go to Play Store, a Play Store for maybe iPhones, and download the Pocket Guide. And if you have an Android, you can go to for Android, you can go to Play Store is for iOS, and Android is Apple Store and Play Store. So you can go and download the Pocket Guide. If even now you can download it, and it will give you step-by-step guidance on how to handle any case that comes up to you when you're doing your work and you're not a GBV expert. There's also another app called Rosa. It's also works the same way as Pocket Guide, but for me, at least, I have an experience of Pocket Guide, and I have it in my phone whenever the need arises. It's just good to have as either ops or DM. So when you go to the field, it will help you and give you how to go about any case that comes up to you. And then finally, why we're here today, and I'm glad that we interacted with the CVA, the PGI CVA checklists, and we really encourage that we're able to use this checklist. It will give us where we are, how we can improve our programming, how we can go about it. It's self-explanatory. It gives you, you're able to tick what you've achieved, what you've not achieved. It's able to give you at minimum what you're supposed to do, because sometimes we need to be honest. We are responding to a humanitarian response. It's really urgent. It's we have to rush. Time is not on our side. We have to save lives. Maybe it's floods. Maybe people are dying. Maybe it's an accident, and sometimes we don't have luxury of time. So there are things that we have to do at minimum, that if we don't do them, then we are not either avoiding harm, or we are not reducing risks. So you look at the CVA checklist, you look at what is minimum, bare minimum, and please try to achieve the bare minimum in any CVA project. And then when we have the luxury of time and we have 3 more months within the project, then we can go into the advanced requirements. For example, at a minimum, we should be able to do reduce SAD, age, sex aggregation in terms of collecting of data. We need to, at minimum, ensure that we are able to have had either gender analysis, or we understand the gender perspectives, or we understand the social norms, either from us or from secondary information. So please just go through it. There's some really minimum requirements, and I will encourage you to interact. We are here to support. The link is there. If any national society needs any session to go through the checklist, we really want to provide and support you in actually going through the checklist within your CVA programs, either past CVA programs or ongoing or whenever we are responding to disasters, or some which are already going 2 months, and then we can support you in ensuring that your PGI sensitive. So I will stop there and hand over to, okay, yeah, I had my very important slide here. We have cash community of practice. And this cash community of practice, why we put this slide was to just explain to you that we need to work together as CVA and PGI colleagues. So sometimes we have in the same national society or even within the IFRC cluster, a PGI focal point person, a CVA focal point person, and we are not talking together. So these platforms are there. You can go as a PGI specialist or as a whatever your role is, and participate in one of these meetings. Ask the cash focal point person, and most of the times whenever we have presentations around protection, gender inclusion, we will invite them. But I was just going to inform you that this structure exists, in case you're not aware. Over to you, Maureen.
Thank you, Sahara. So I'll just continue with the presentation. And now we've gotten to a point where we're going to look critically into how we can ensure that we work towards a PGI-sensitive CVA in hunger crisis response. Now that you understand what CVA is, you understand what PGI is, it will be good now for us to see, since we already have the checklist with us. I know we also have some opt team members with us who support the different national societies. It will be good for us to share ideas in terms of what is the next steps, in terms of what are the some questions that are going to lead our discussion today is one, what are the specific PGI risks related to the hunger crisis? And being that the ops team and the national societies present today are those that are responding to the hunger crisis, it will be good to hear what are some specific PGI risks that are related to the hunger crisis. So maybe feel free to unmute yourself or feel free to utilize the chat box to share any question, any responses to the questions that we have from these slides. So what are the specific PGI risks related to the hunger crisis? I know one of them has been mentioned in terms of an increase to SGBV cases experienced within the communities. What else do you think are some specific PGI risks that are related to the hunger crisis? I know you've experienced this from your assessments. Yes, Sahal, please come in.
Yeah, maybe physical harm, because when people get money and in the awareness of their neighborhoods and all that, and in most cases, they get into more risk, yeah, where probably the environment is risky, especially in the case of Ethiopia, you see, there are compounded risks. There is a lot of insecurity situations around the drought areas as well. And then you find that when people get cash and the community has this information, then the family gets more vulnerable, more exposed to some of these risks. Yes.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Sahal, for raising that important point. I think this is also experienced across board within the different national societies or within the communities that we are serving. Any other? Yes, there's a hand up from Hopewell. I was actually going to pinpoint you, Hopewell.
Okay, I think there are quite a number. We can talk of things around the negative coping mechanisms. Young girls selling their bodies in terms of trying to get something on the table or to try and feed their families. Families actually allowing their young girls to be married off in order for the family to survive. There's the element around also for Nigeria specifically, where you have these clashes between farmers and herders over land, so that either the herds can survive or the farmers can actually produce something. So those clashes are also as a result of the hunger crisis, but they spill over to actually protection needs for for the different families. And then you have issues around the internal displacements, which arise as a result of either conflict, but also as a result of the hunger crisis, where people actually move to other areas, to other host communities where they can easily be abused in terms of, seeking shelter, for instance, or seeking, some form of respite in terms of getting some food from the host communities. So those elements can easily also arise as a result of the hunger crisis.
Very important. Yeah, thank you so much, Paul, for those points. Very good points coming up in terms of also issues of early marriage. We have issues of recorded issues of sexual exploitation and abuse. We have issues of internal displacements where also the risks go high, and also during clashes between the farmers and the herders because of the land and and food for their livestock and such like. So it's also a challenge. Dorcas from Kenya Red Cross. Anything to add?
I would add the broader scope of child protection, which looks at the unaccompanied children. So beyond the children that are sent to look for labor during the movement, being able to also pick up the different needs and alignments for child protection and be able to work with the line ministries to ensure that the referral pathway is facilitated to protect the child, especially those that are not able to go to school, for instance, due to the hunger crisis and the priorities within the family. And additionally, also being able to look out for other abuses amongst the young people within the household. Over.
Yeah, very important point there in terms of issues of child protection, child safeguarding. I like that you've also just put in already a solution into what can be done. Maybe with this, I know that there are many more that we have not spoken about. There are many more that you've experienced within your countries based on the different contexts. But because of time, we're going to move to the next question in terms of share 3 ways in which you will ensure or are ensuring your CVA programs are PGI sensitive. So within this, you can share maybe what you've already been doing or what you would think would be a good way to ensure that CVA programs are PGI sensitive. I like that Sahal has his hand up. So Sahal, you go first. Please come in. Sahal, please come in. I see your hand is up. Okay. Sahal?
Hold hand for me. No, sorry, hold hand for me.
Okay. Amin, maybe I can check with Amin from Sudan. Any responses on this? Amin, if you're trying to speak, you're muted. All right, anyone else can come in? Gabriel? Yes, Gabriel, please come in.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was actually thinking I should raise my hand, and I don't know if I did eventually. All right, thank you for the opportunity. I know that for us, what we do usually is to ensure that the PGI focal points and the CVA focal points have a coordination meeting where we iron out, we discuss out those issues that we should likely look out for when we go out there in the field. And also we try to orient the volunteers, the partners that we're working with, be it financial service providers, stakeholders. We put them through all the codes that we have, be it code of conduct, child safeguarding, whatever protection parameters we have. We make them understand those things so they are able to work with it. So in so doing, we have been able to curtail some of the protection issues that are likely to occur out there. Thank you. Over.
Great. Thank you very much, Gabriel. You've raised a very good point there in mentioning that it's important that the PGI and CVA, including CEA, focal points, get to work together and collaborate to ensure that, of course, they utilize the checklist. Two, they support the different sectors and also work towards ensuring they conduct a proper assessment, which is PGI inclusive. You can utilize the PGI analysis to be able to support you on this. And that way you're able to ensure that CVA programs are PGI sensitive. Good point. Hopewell, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, actually, you just mentioned part of it, that is not to leave out CEA, because CEA is one of the important cogs in terms of making sure that whatever that we do is PGI and CVA is PGI sensitive, especially with the cash programming. But also, the elements around the analysis, I think sometimes we talk of analysis in general, but there is quite a lot which has to go with it. For instance, when you look at the different cultural contexts, religious contexts, which surround certain elements, we have to really dig deep into those areas and see how we best can engage. Because we might say that, for instance, in the presentation which Sahara was giving, and I think she also mentioned it to some extent. You look at, we can say we want to prioritize, let's say, women as the people who receive the cash, but that in itself can actually end up creating, SGBV cases within the household, because religion and tradition then says the man has to make those particular decisions. And this is a thing which could be sort of like stemming within that society or community over years, where women are actually very silent in some of these instances. So we have to find means and ways to sort of like go around it to ensure that when we are trying to ensure that our programs are CVA sensitive, they also have to look at what are those considerations in terms of those cultural and religious aspects within those particular communities, which will keep without actually bringing harm to them. So in essence, whatever aspects that we do, we always have to have that thinking behind to say, are we doing more harm or not, as we are giving any particular method or methodology. And then just also ensuring that we have referral pathways established for all this, for all our level of programming. And this has to be a discussion which has to happen at a community level, and also within the national society, and also with the different stakeholders that we are engaging with, so that once we are sharing this information to the beneficiaries or to the affected persons, it is information which is shared amongst the different stakeholders. It is information which the different stakeholders also agree on, so that we don't surprise people, but we have everybody on board before sharing that, even through the pre-address prior cash distribution. Over.
Great. Thank you very much, Hopewell. Very good points coming out. And thank you for the good reminder in terms of the analysis, because you would need to understand who are we supporting, what's the context, and how do we make sure that we avoid all the risks that may be experienced. Very good point in terms of safe referral pathways, and this is what we've been encouraging national societies to make sure that they are able to set this up, and we are available for technical support, but also the operations team from the clusters being also able to support the same and reaching out to us in case of any support they will require, even as they support the national societies. Very good points coming in. Because of time, we'll move to the next question. SGBV risks are heightened in an emergency context. What measures will you put in place to mitigate SGBV risks? I point this question to Julio, seeing that you now have your CVA delegate on board. And I know maybe there's some issues of SGBV already experienced within the response. So it'd be good for you to just come in and let us know maybe what measures you would put in place or you have put in place to be able to mitigate SGBV risks. Julio, over to you. Julio? All right. Anyone else would want to come in? If you have noticed, I am picking people. So you may be next. Just trying to encourage participation from all.
I have few in the chat box. Maybe you can read out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sahal.
Thank you, Sahal.
So Sahal says the process needs to ensure safety of the delivery, work in harmony with community culture to minimize domestic level conflict, which is great, to avoid intimate partner violence, which has been emphasized, is that we engage with community members to understand how best CVA to share who best in the family to get the cash and voucher assistance. Safety of delivery is very important as well. Avoid blanket labeling during targeting. Great. And the only way we'll avoid this is ensuring that our targeting is focused on how we engage with community members. And I think that stems down to analysis as well. Thank you, Sahal. Thank you very much. I know Dorcas as well. Sorry, you wanted to come in, then I started speaking. Please go ahead. Thank you, Sahal.
You already spoke to it. I was looking at safe referral pathways. So one is to cover up, to map and identify the critical referral sites and resources that we have pre-emergency context, so that by the time we are in an emergency, of course, we are able to navigate along that. But beyond that, continuously communicating the correct referral pathways, because then during the emergency context, there's the assumption that at a particular level, someone can only do what they think they know. But when we have this clearly outlined and continuously advocated throughout our engagements and during the community engagement, then it's easy to remember and align the referral on the same. But more importantly, it's the context specific and safety within the referral. Over.
Thank you, Dorcas. Maybe just to emphasize on all Dorcas has said, Dorcas is the PGI focal point for Kenya Red Cross. It's very important as well. When we talk about safe referral pathways, it's also understanding, just to emphasize what she has said, that even as CVA actors, this is one of the best ways we can coordinate as PGI and CVA colleagues as well, since we sit in different forums where, for example, we're part of the GBV working groups in country. If some of the national societies are expressing interest, we are happy to connect them to the GBV working groups in country, since the mapping has already been done. So it's very easy for us as use our strength as the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement to ensure that we are part of the engaging with different actors. We understand the referral pathways, and then we are able to refer safely to ensure safe referral pathways as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Milanoy. Hopewell.
Okay. All right. So I think one of the issues when we are looking at heightened risks in an emergency context is, when are we deciding sort of like to start working on the mitigation aspect? And I believe that we have to sort of like not look at it from the context of an emergency, but let's look at it from the context of planning, whether it's through the unified planning or, you know, when we are setting out in the first place, even in the situations where we don't have an emergency at stake. I think that's where we have to really do most of the work, because once we get to an emergency context, these things have to be in place already for us to now start utilizing them amidst the confusion and the panic that goes with it. So I'm thinking that the planning processes should be very critical for us to already anticipate you know, an emergency context and the setup that is around us implementing, you know, reducing or mitigating against the SGBV risks. So you will also notice that in most cases, SGBV risks usually happen when the situation is still in turmoil, like when we are still starting to set up the operation. In most cases, that's why I'm trying to look at it from a point where we look at it from an anticipatory rather than from a response kind of a situation. When you're setting up your camps, when children are still not going into school, the school setups have not been sort of like established within those camp setups, that's when you will see most of these things actually happening. But if we are looking at the planning stage, we already anticipate that if there's going to be a displacement, this is one of the key issues that has to be looked at immediately before we even as we are setting up a camp, or even as we are starting the response element. So I would rather take it from a planning stage to say, let's now start, pushing for that. Even when we are talking of anticipatory drafts, the anticipatory drafters should, in my own view, should have a key component which basically addresses the PGI element, not just in talking about it or having it in a document, but actually having it as part of the programming itself as we are moving.
Very important points that you're raising there, Hopewell. And I think this is something we should continue to emphasize in terms of planning. More often than not, you find national societies have planned for activities for SGBV as the last resort. So you've already done the cash, you've already done the distribution, you've already done the procurement and different other things. That's when you bring out the issue of SGBV and capacity building the communities and the staff and volunteers. So I think it's important to have this in the planning, making sure we are trying to mitigate. We're trying to mitigate, so it's important to have it at the planning stage. The other thing is that IFRC already has developed SGBV toolkit tools that can support the work in terms of what is it that we can do to mitigate SGBV risk. And these are some of the tools we've shared with you and that you can be able to access and be able to support your work. So they're very good points that you've raised there, Hopewell. And I hope that all of us are taking note of that and just reflecting on how it is that we're doing our work. Dorcas, I know we have 3 minutes to end. I'm just kindly requesting that you allow us to just take 10 more minutes of your time just to be able to summarize this. Dorcas, as you come in, it's also good to check the last question in terms of whether we have the capacity to ensure our hunger crisis CVA responses are PGI sensitive, beyond saying that PGI has been mainstreamed, which is what we are seeing in most of the National Society reports. PGI was mainstreamed in CVA, but then when you ask how, there's always the question mark of how, because this has not been demonstrated within the report or within the set activities that have been put there. Dorcas, you had your hand up? Oh, it was an old hand. Maybe Huriel, you can also come in and provide your input. Johnson, feel free to also provide your input. Jefta, the same.
Yeah. Maureen, allow me to mention the thought that came to my mind when we were talking about the risks for GBV and emerging is the need for aligning that again with the community SARE reporting and the mechanisms for reporting SARE, especially among humanitarian workers.
Yeah, very good point in terms of.
Yeah, and the second part is the budgetary allocation for facilitating this process, because yes, we have very good and elaborate processes that are aligned within the checklist, but over time, every time we are like writing a draft for planning for emergency response, we keep missing out on the budgetary cost implications for PGI implementation, and that then limits the goodwill that PGI can facilitate to ensure that we have safety and safe communities within the entire engagement. Over.
Yeah, very good point, Dorcas. Thank you for that reminder, and very good point coming up in terms of funding. And funding is also part of the planning, yeah? So if you don't include money at the start, it's very difficult for you to be able to include money at the end. Julia, I see your comment on the chat box. Thank you. I was saying that SGBV risks in all the related PGI themes are to be discussed before emergencies. So it's also talking about having it being done at the planning stage. Also very important to engage the national society and communities and debates and capacity building. So capacity building is very important beforehand. And this also just again goes back to planning to ensure that we are able to mitigate the SGBV risks. Thank you very much, Julio, for those comments. Maybe this just goes to the ops teams on who are supporting within the clusters or within the national societies, if there are any present from the national societies. Do we have capacity to ensure that hunger crisis severe responses are sensitive within the national societies? Do you think we have the capacity to support this? Within the cluster, do you think we have the capacity to support this? Hopefully you can come in first, and then anyone else can follow.
Okay, maybe just one point to add to the previous question before I answer your question. I think also when we are looking at this in terms of mainstreaming or whatever, or mainstreaming in the design, or to say that we have the capacity, I think it starts where we are saying, for instance, when we're doing the selection criteria, because when you're doing the selection criteria, you're already into PGI already, because the affected persons are the ones that you want to protect. You want to look at the gender mainstreaming. You also want to look at inclusion. Are we including the different personalities? So already the information where to start from or whatever is already there. So it's now an element of us now building into it. So in terms of capacity, the capacity is there. If we are able to register people, it means we have the capacity to actually talk about PGI, because the criteria for you to say this is the affected person, it's actually PGI criteria, which we are not seeing, or maybe we ignore, but it is already PGI criteria, which is already being utilized in terms of actually selecting the different beneficiaries. So the criteria is there, the capacity is there, to ensure that our responses are sensitive in a major way. And I think it's also demystifying what we call sensitivity in terms of PGI. What are we saying is our sensitive issues, or what we are classifying as that? Because I think most people are taking it from a case where if there's gender-based violence, then we now have to have a way of dealing with those sensitive cases. But actually it starts way before, because the person that's going to be affected by the gender-based violence is the person that we are actually selecting into the program. So how do we reinforce that? How do we foster that at the very beginning? I think these are the critical capacities that I would say we need to look at when we are now working on that. So the people that are going down into the community to do the actual activities around selection and so forth, have they been really trained and capacitated in the first place for them to answer all these questions? And I think when we look at it that way now, that's when we can then say, okay, is there capacity or is there no capacity? But in terms of people talking about it, and in terms of people saying that they can move it, capacities are there. And people understand, even the checklist can actually give us that. But let's look at it from the process methodology rather than the output.
Good, very good point coming from you, Hopewell, especially being that you're an ops person supporting also in the national society. It's important for you to understand this, and once you're able to understand this, then it's easy for you to work with the national societies and provide the technical support required. So very good points coming up. Sahal, I see your hand is up.
Yes, just to complement what my colleague said, basically for me to start with, I will say that in terms of programmatic design, when we are designing operations, PGI is fully integral. In regard, you'll find that there are specific sections of the program. To mention a few, community engagement issues, it is very elaborate in the design of the program, how PGI should be sensitized in terms of the community engagement pillars of the program. Secondly, targeting issues. Then again, I think in every program and every operation, it's very elaborate how it will be, PGI issues will be underscored in the targeting in terms of vulnerability protection and special needs among the populations that are supposed to be reached. For me, again, I would say that yes, in terms of design, again, most of the operations contribute to some capacity for the national societies, especially training staff, training volunteers. And for me, basically, all these builds up to some capacity. So I will say that some level of capacity is there, but the issue is the practicality, the application of all this on the ground. And sometimes what I would say probably where the link, or rather inadequacy in terms of capacity could be is the general environment in terms of the linkage viral pathways. You'll find that some of those infrastructures are very developed. In maybe if it's a refugee operation, camp IDP setup operation, where there's close linkage of stakeholders. But for operations like drought, just at large there, you'll find that some of these systems or pathway infrastructures, even if they exist, not very much coordinated infrastructures. So basically, this gives a gap in most of our operations. Otherwise, I would say yes, substantially, we need to see how we can increase coordination around the pathway issues with the different expertise required in that regard, as well as probably, again, the practicality on how we put on foot some of the things we put on the design of programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sahal. Sorry. Very good points coming from your end too, and good reminders for us even as we continue working towards a more PGI sensitive CVA approach. I like the comments you provided in terms of also capacity. It's looking at from the design stage, what do we have already and what can we then develop? And I think this is also part of what Julio has mentioned within the chat box, where he says that would need to analyze and see whether we have human resource capacity, we have the knowledge, we have the materials required and the tools required to then do the work. And if we do not, then there's an opportunity for us to be able to build on this specific capacity. And this can also be identified quite early so that it can be addressed also quite early to ensure that the process is smooth and that we are very sensitive on the PGI response. So thank you so much, Julio, and thank you so much, Sahal, for that. Huriel has also put a very good comment on the chat box, just reminding the PGI focal points in terms of their role to reach out to the ops teams on ground, to be able to ops managers, ref managers, for them to not forget PGI and to include us as PGI focal points from the beginning. We should be visible at any steps of the project, and this is a way to ensure our hunger crisis severe responses are PGI sensitive. It's never too late. We can go now. We can go now each and discuss with the relevant persons to make inputs at this particular point. So very good point coming from Huriel, that we as PGI staff, is also our role to engage ourselves with the different groups on ground, the ops teams, with the CVA teams, with the CEA teams, to just ensure we are all harmonized and collaborating towards this. Because of time, I just want us to just quickly go forward in terms of what we shared as a way forward. And before I get there, I've seen a comment from Hopewell saying it's not difficult, but I think it's the way we look at a response options. This is responding to the question from Illinois in regards to budgeting. When we know why PGI and CEA, when we know why PGI, why CEA, it is easy to build PGI activities into the programming. And in most cases, it may not be standalone activities. For example, training of CVA volunteers should already build in the different topics. So thank you very much, Hopewell, for raising this. And this is something that we've continued to discuss, especially within the hunger crisis. Let's not, as much as the planning may have been done in some national societies and there was no funding allocation for PGI, let's not say that you're not going to implement PGI activities until the next review of the appeal. It'll be good for us to look into the different sectors, what are the different sectors responding to, and then try to see how you can then integrate PGI within the work. And one very good example is what you've provided in terms of CVA. There's no way you'll do a training for volunteers on CVA and staff and volunteers on CVA and leave out aspects of PGI. Yet, we are saying we want a PGI sensitive CVA approach. So thank you very much, Hopewell, for that. We had some key way forward that we had listed. If you feel that something has been left out, please feel free to just input within the chat box. One is CVA, PGI, and CEA colleagues in national societies, including the ops team members, to collaborate and work together to fill the CVA checklist. Collaborations, like I've said, with the ops teams to ensure funding allocation for PGI sensitive CVA sensitization, as well as implementation. Document how you integrate PGI and CVA. Let's revise our reports and ensure that our reports are more elaborate in terms of how we have managed to integrate PGI and CVA. Let's also share the good practices so that other national societies can get to learn from their fellow peers. and of course, the lessons learned in the process, especially with this particular opportunity that we have of working towards a PGI-sensitive CVA within the hunger crisis response. Share learnings within the different networks. You've heard Sahara has talked about the community of practice for CVA. We also have our regional network for PGI focal points across the region. And so it's important for us to be able to share these specific learnings across board. But last but not least, very important for us to feel free to request for technical support at the cluster and the regional level in case someone would want more support on this. We are readily available to support in the process, and that we are a phone call away, we are a WhatsApp call away, we are Teams chat away, an email away, just to be able to come in and be able to support. Sahara mentioned on the chat box, that's important to see a PGI as a quality assurance for CVA, and that's why we will be more focused on the process outcome while also looking at the outputs. Thank you, Sahara, for that reminder. I think it's important and good that we have national societies and ops team members in the room, and that they can always remember this even as they continue with their work. So any questions so far? Feedback, inputs? What we would want you to do is once you go back to your normal routine, just feel free to, if you haven't done so yet, just not feel free. Open and click on the checklist, go through it, try to use it within the hunger response and see whether you can fill out a few things. If you have any questions or feedback for us, then it would be a good opportunity for you to do so and provide that at that particular point. Gabriel, please come in.
Yeah, I just want to mention that just one of the ways that we can move forward is also to ensure that we do a very good program design. In most cases, we do our needs assessment, PGI assessment, let me say, and the analysis, it comes out well. But when it comes to the program itself, you don't see a correlation between what we are doing and what the analysis and the assessment report says. For instance, if we're doing a livelihood program for in communities, the assessment must have shown that women have more preference to maybe vegetable farming, but at the end of it, we go out to the communities and just give them seeds, maybe crop farming, and everybody is doing crop farming without regards to what our assessment and analysis is really pointing at. So I think we need to do a lot around program design, which should be one of the ways forward, so that once the programs are well designed, then we are able to implement it with the PGI lens. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, for that. Very good point. As much as we're doing the assessments and the analysis, how is that informing your work? How is it supporting your planning and designing and also implementation? Hopewell?
Yeah, thank you so much. Initially, I didn't want to say it, but thank you, Gabriel. You have already started that, and I don't want to take long. But there's something about analysis for PGI which is different from your general PMER. For instance, I'll give an example. If let's say 70% of the people say they want to go this direction and 20% say this direction, with PGI you have to deliver for both directions. That's the difference. Yeah, because if you leave out the 20% and say that the general is going this way, those 20 are the ones that are going to be harmed.
And they might be the more
I think it's something that we need to, the more vulnerable, and it's something that we need to rethink when we're looking at analysis around PGI as well. So yeah, thank you.
Very good point, Hopewell. Let's always remember, as we conduct our assessments and conduct our PGI analysis, read into what the findings are, and from that be able to design your implementation plan based on what is already on the ground. Remember, with the PGI analysis, we reach out to all the different, we reach out to communities based on their gender, their age, their different diversities. And so at this particular point, it's whether they are able to share what it is that what they think, what they actually they express what is their need, they express what would be a solution to their need. And so if we utilize this, then it's also a way of encouraging meaningful participation, because remember, participation does not just mean having people in a room. Having consulted them and putting into consideration what they are saying is also informing part of meaningful participation in this within the different groups in the community. So like Hopewell said, let's work towards that and make sure that at the end of the day we are able to address this. Because of time, unfortunately, yes, come in.
Sorry, can I just give an example, a real life example of something that I saw in Zimbabwe when I was doing a CVA operation in one of the communities. So so we are doing our the beneficiary selection. So you gather the community and you ask the community to verify. It was by village. So in most cases, the village is about 25 households in the context of Zimbabwe. So you ask the village to say, okay, can you rank the people that you want in terms of that you say are the most vulnerable in that whatever. So what was going on was, I think the villages had already set before prior, because when you are doing continuous programming in some of these communities, they already now understand your selection criteria and all that, so they will know what to do. So they already ranked and done whatever. So it was like you have the people seated there, but you have certain people who are quiet, you have certain people that are talking. And the people who were very quiet were the ones who were actually the most vulnerable. And the ones that were left out in that community were actually the people that we needed to bring into the programming. So if you look at it from a CVA kind of a thing where you are just, okay, this is what the community is saying, and then you take it as that, then you will miss the point. But if you look at it from a PGI lens, then you say to yourself, I need to go and see this household, I need to go and see this household and see this household. So that's why I'm saying these things are interlinked. You do your selection, the verification is basically PGI. If I were to coin it, it's PGI, because you are now going household by household against those people that you have already been told. So you want to make sure that you haven't excluded anyone. You have managed to take the people who are really deserving, the people that are not being discriminated against because of who they are or what they are in those particular communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Hopewell, for that very good example. Maybe something else I'd want to encourage the community, the different groups represented in this session today. I think it would be good for you to target utilizing the checklist, especially within the response that you have. And one common aspect here is the hunger crisis response. Just have a look at it with your national societies for the ops teams. Have a look at it as national society focal points, at CVA and CEA focal points. Just fill it out and see the experience and get to see how beneficial it is to remind you of what you may have left out or who you may have left out within the communities, and also how you need to work around it in terms of addressing this particular issue. Unfortunately, and we really apologize, we've taken 20 minutes of your time, and we really apologize for this, but we are grateful that you stuck behind to be able to listen to us and be able to share. We appreciate your participation. We continue to be available. Here are our email addresses for those who may not have our email addresses. Sahara, Maureen, and Milanoy, we are available for continuous support. So please feel free to reach out to us and we'll be able to come in and support you. Gabriel, I see your hand is up. I don't know if it's an old hand or it's a current hand.
Sorry, it's an old hand.
All right. Thank you. So good. I think we've come to an end of our session today. I request before.
Thanks, Maureen.
Yeah, I request before we log off that you please switch on your camera and let's wave at each other and say goodbye in our local language. Let's all wave. I don't know whether you're able to. Just please don't log off until we at least take a photo. Okay. Just a minute.
Shabi.
Yes, let's all. Good. Johnson, good to see you.
Shabi.
Odabo. Good to see you.
And then let's mention goodbyes. Min, good to see you. Robert, good to see you.
Odabo.
Yes, I'm here. Bye.
Odabo
Good
is
to
the
see you
global
too,
language
Maureen.
in Yoruba. Odabo.
Hello,
Yeah,
how are you?
taking a photo. We're taking a photo. So let's all just let's all actually say goodbye in our local languages.
Maureen, do a screenshot.
Yeah.
We're already taking a photo.
Oh,
We're already taking a photo. Milano is taking a photo.
I see.
Yeah. All
Where are
right.
my cash people? Where are my cash people?
Today, good to see you. Dorcas, please put on your video. Julio, obrigado.
Gabriel.
I picked the ball.
All right, now all together we say goodbye in
Bye.
our local language.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, colleagues. There's no local language as goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Au revoir.